Greetings, everyone. I'm Dr. David Adler, president of the Alturas Institute and a constitutional scholar, here today to talk with you about the subject, what's a coup look like? Well, unfortunately, Americans, we now know. On January 6th, millions of Americans watched on their televisions a siege unfold before their very eyes. A mob consisting of more than 1,000 supporters of Donald Trump stormed the Capitol and broke windows, knocked down doors, wreaked havoc on the floor of the House and the Senate. This was the only second time in our history when, in fact, the Capitol was under siege. The first time, of course, was in the War of 1812. The difference between that siege and this one was the first one occurred when the British Army ransacked the Capitol, indeed burned it to the ground. This time, tragically, this insurrection was carried out by the words of President Donald Trump. Indeed, at a rally, he inspired his crowd, whom he had invited to join him from across the country. He said to his supporters, "Join me in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. This will be wild." And he said to his crowd, an enthusiastic throng of diehard Trump supporters, "Don't let them steal this election from us. March to the Capitol. I'll come with you," even though he didn't. He said, you have to show strength. You have to be strong. You have to fight like hell, the president said. And when the mob stormed the Capitol, the police were unprepared for it. The Capitol was taken over, and Americans were horrified that our temple of democracy, which we refer to as a beacon of liberty, known throughout the world as a model of liberty, a house where great discussions and debates unfold and serve as a supreme effort to produce good policies, programs, and laws, it all came to a standstill. It came to a standstill because the mob had succeeded in the insurrection, in an act of sedition. Indeed, it was a coup because they had thwarted the effort of Congress to perform its constitutional duty to count and certify the electoral votes for Joseph R. Biden, our president-elect. The successful effort to stall, indeed to halt for several hours, this constitutional process represented one of the gravest threats to our constitutional democracy, because Americans expect, and the Constitution provides, for an orderly transition of power, one performed in the last measure by this very formal act of certifying and counting the vote. Americans were badly shaken by this event. America, we might say, was knocked to the canvas. It got up off the canvas because Americans have resilience, and Congress was able to resume its duty. And finally, in the wee hours of the morning on January 7, Congress did its business and certified that indeed Joe Biden will be our next president. What caused all of this, and why should we be so deeply concerned? The President of the United States, Donald Trump, committed an act of sedition. Sedition, defined, is an act inciting violence to either overthrow government or to undermine the exercise of governmental power. That's exactly what was carried out yesterday. And Trump incited, indeed he encouraged his faithful throng to perform that act of sedition. Does it mean that Donald Trump would be prosecuted for this act? We have to understand, of course, under American law, that there is great protection afforded free speech, and rightly so, because in a democracy we want a full-fledged discussion and debate of all the possible programs and laws that we might seek to embrace as a nation. However, every nation has the right to protect itself, and so therefore, laws prohibiting sedition are as old as civilization itself, and sedition laws are deeply embedded in American law. The crime is not very often prosecuted, but in fact, ordinary Americans have been found guilty of sedition and have gone to prison. How does the Supreme Court deal with that essentially important question about how to draw a line between protected speech and seditious speech. Here's what the Supreme Court said in 1969 in Brandenburg versus Ohio. It said speech is protected unless it incites immediate unlawful action. Or as Justice Douglas said in that case, if speech is brigaded with action, inciting unlawful, violent action, then that speech is not protected. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say to you that that's exactly what Donald Trump's speech was all about yesterday. He was inciting his faithful to march to the Capitol and to essentially reclaim the election, which he said had been fraudulently carried out and represented a theft of his right to stay in the White House. He had gotten them very excited, and off they went. I don't expect that the president will be prosecuted for the crime of sedition. Indeed, if you think back to the Mueller report written by Robert Mueller and his staff, you'll recall that he expressed frustration when he said that Donald Trump had committed at least 10 acts of obstruction, which for anybody else, for any ordinary American, typically would result in a prison sentence, but not for the President of the United States because, Robert Mueller reminded us, under current policy, the Department of Justice does not permit the prosecution of a president for the commission of crimes. Why does the Department of Justice rest on such a flimsy, lame predicate? It's because in 1973, the Office of Legal Counsel, in a memorandum, wrote that the president should not be subject to prosecution for for criminal acts. This frustrated Mueller, you could tell, and therefore he could not proceed to prosecute Donald Trump for any acts of obstruction of justice. The reality is that policy undermines our very commitment to the rule of law because it protects the president from all possible criminal acts. And this would frustrate the very efforts of our founding fathers who, in the Constitutional Convention, agreed that the president, like any ordinary citizen, should be amenable to the law, amenable to the judicial process. And therefore, as James Wilson from Pennsylvania put it, the president would not enjoy a single privilege not annexed to the character of every other citizen. Let me tell you, when the new Congress digs in and begins its work, helmed by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, one of the first things that Congress should do is to overturn what is only a policy through the drafting of a statute to make it clear that any future president can in fact be prosecuted for crimes. This won't touch Donald Trump on this occasion, but in fact, if some future president behaved as Donald Trump did and engaged in the crime of sedition, even though it won't be prosecuted, it will in fact protect America from such future acts. Let's make no mistake about it. The action on January 6th represented insurrection. It was a horrible, terrible deed perpetrated against American democracy, and we need to hold officials accountable. The first thing to do is to engage in an investigation to find out why Capitol Police were not fully prepared for what everybody understood was coming, a huge march on the Capitol. Donald Trump had made it clear. Everybody knew. Why was there not better preparation? That has to be done. The second thing that has to be done is to arrest and prosecute to the full extent of the law all of those who invaded our Capitol, who broke the windows, who ransacked the offices of House and Senate members, and they need to be held accountable so that Americans will understand that we do not accept attacks on the U.S. Capitol building. That's the best way, the first way, and the best way to continue to protect our democracy. Thanks for listening. If you like this program, follow the Alturas Institute at alturasinstitute.com and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thank you.